All right. Oh, I think it's good enough now. Yeah. Okay. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Houston Oasis. I am Verena Kalhoff, and I am going to be your MC today, helping us get through the program. For those of you who are new to Houston Oasis, Houston Oasis is a secular community, a community of compassion and reason. Our core values are over yonder. And that is, in many respects, our social contract, right? That is the way we interact with each other, and it is the way we honor each other and make sure we're recognizing everybody's humanity and treating everybody with respect. If you're interested, we also have a code of conduct that we ask everybody to abide by. That is posted on both of our Facebook page as well as on the HoustonOasis.org page. If you care to make yourself familiar with that, don't feel free to do so. Before we really dive into the program, I wanted to ask whether there are any announcements from you all, celebrations, things you want to share with the community? All right, well, I guess, now if there are things that you guys are struggling with, we do have a care team that is available whether you're struggling with some of the occurrences that happened earlier this month that I think are weighing heavily on all of our minds. On the one hand, we have the care team. On the other hand, we also have a number of folks who are very engaged in the community and are trying to make not just Houston, but Texas and the U.S. a better place for all of us to be. So if there's anything you're struggling with, do reach out for the conversation. I think we always will. We have the community. We're here for each other. And so seeking that conversation, I think, is going to be very important. I think care team is at careteam.houston.org, right? Yeah. Okay, so feel free to reach out. And if it's just you need a ride to a medical appointment, just do reach out. One thing I wanted to mention, and just a big shout out and thank you to Abhishek and Kelly for organizing the homeless outreach that happened yesterday. Abhishek, they organize this about once a month, every other month or something like that, and just really connecting with our transient population and handing out some supplies for them to try to elevate their living a little bit. And it's just, I think, great for them to know that folks are out there really caring. And I think there were 7 or 8 volunteers from the secular communities around Houston that were there. I also wanted to give a big thank you, shout out to all of you who came to the silent auction and an event last week. We raised close to $1,500. It was also a cookbook sign up. So the cookbooks have about 60 recipes from community members around the Houston Oasis community. And they're $25 a pop. Please, if you are interested in them, we will not have them generally available to purchase after we order them. So if you want one, please, there's a sign-up sheet in the back. Go ahead and put your name on that. Go ahead and pay today. Emily is ordering the books tomorrow. And so that we can get the biggest discount, we're doing one big order for everyone. We will have these ready, back to you and ready within probably 2 or 3 weeks. So in time, if you want to hand those over to family members for the holidays and gifts, etc. We had a little bit of a cancellation today, so what you see as music on your pamphlet for for today has morphed as of, I don't know, 8 o'clock this morning or 8:30. And so we'll have our board member, music organizer, and child care expert and everything extraordinary if you need Pete Lippincott. He is the heart and soul of Pete Simple, brings his dynamic musical talent to Houston Oasis for an unforgettable solo performance. So the stakes are high here. A proud member of the Tesuque Pueblo tribe in Tesuque, New Mexico, Pete weaves his indigenous heritage into his music, creating a rich and authentic sound that transcends genres. With a blend of rock, funk, jazz, and soul, Pete captivates audiences through his heartfelt songwriting, intricate melodies, and powerful stage presence. Having toured the US and England and performed at South by Southwest for many years, Pete's artistry resonates deeply, inspiring connection and transformation through the universal language of music. Pete, take it away.
Thanks, Verena. Morning, everybody. And I'm on the care team, so if you need a ride later, let me know. It's true. Wouldn't it be nice to leave Los Angeles? Let's just see what comes of it. Finding those hipsters that hang around. Wouldn't it be nice to leave tonight? Let the rain come down on you. The wistful moonlit night sings so softly across your tongue. Let the rain come down on me, and you will always right my wrongs. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to leave Houston, Texas? Let's just see what comes of it. Riding the rail silently downtown tonight. It's a one-way ticket to nowhere and out of sight. Let the rain down on you. The whisper moonlit night sings so softly across your tongue. Let the rain come down on me, and you will always right my wrongs. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice to leave New York City? Your friends seem to help you when it comes time. Finding your dreams already conquered and won. Wouldn't it be nice to leave tonight? Let the rain come down on you. Whisper moonlit night sing so softly across your tongue. Let the rain come down on me, and you will always right my wrongs. you will always right my wrongs. Wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice? Thank you. I'm supposed to play two. Armin does say hello. Part of booking professional musicians is sometimes they get stuck on the road. So he says, sorry, we'll try and get him rebooked maybe in December. So for those of you that came out to try and see him, we will get him back. Thank you again for coming out to Oasis this morning. Now that I lost everything to you, so you wanna start something new, breaking my heart you're leaving. Baby, I'm grieving. If you wanna leave, take good care. Hope you have a lot of nice friends out there. A lot of nice things turn bad out there. Well, oh baby, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by just upon a smile. Baby, 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 baby. Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world. Always remember you like a child girl. You know I've seen a lot of what the world can do, breaking my heart in two. Never want to see you sad, girl. Don't be a bad girl. If you wanna leave, take good care. You have a lot of nice things to wear. A lot of nice things turn bad out there. Well, oh baby, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by just upon a smile. Oh baby, baby, it's a wild world. Always remember you like a child girl. Baby, I love you. If you wanna live, take good care. You have a lot of nice friends out there. A lot of nice things turn bad out there. Well, oh baby, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by just upon a smile. Oh baby, baby, it's a wild world. Always remember you like a child girl.
Awesome, Pete. Thank you so much. Okay, so while we're getting the speaker all set up, we're going to take a 10-minute coffee break. It might just be 9 minutes and 57 seconds, but no, please go ahead and refill your coffees, connect with everybody, and sign up for a cookbook. Sign-ups are in the back where Tim's standing at, and we will see you here at 10:55. Tanzania, and led trips to places such as the Galapagos and Tahiti. And I believe he just mentioned that he's headed to Antarctica in a few weeks. His writing has appeared in National Geographic, NBC News, Slate, and others. His book, Future Humans, was named to the AAAS 2017 Best Book list. He co-wrote the docuseries Becoming Martian for CuriosityStream and hosts the Wild World podcast. Currently, he's writing a book on how space travel affects the human body and mind. Solomon is a fellow of the Explorers Club and an associate editor of the Journal of Tropical Ecology, and he also teaches a master class at Rice University on human evolution and all things that are of interest to folks who are not necessarily science majors, but that have a distinct interest in that. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Scott Solomon.
Well, good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here, and already had some wonderful conversations in the few minutes I've been here. I have to say, I was not familiar with Oasis until I received this invitation, and as soon as I did, I started looking up, what you guys are doing and what it's all about, and I thought, wow, what an incredible community, what an incredible group of people. So it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today, talking about one of my favorite topics. As you heard a bit in the introduction, I do a lot of different things. My background, my training is as an evolutionary biologist, and for my dissertation research, I studied leafcutter ants in the Amazon basin. And so I get to talk about ants today. This is definitely something I love to geek out about. So apologies in advance if I just go on too long talking about ants. I have a tendency. My course evaluations at Rice always say something to the effect of like, good professor, interesting guy, really likes ants. The topic might have nothing to do with ants, but they just find their way into my lectures one way or another. But what I thought I would share today is a little bit of my thoughts on how studying and learning about ants might actually have some practical benefits in terms of things that we as humans might be able to learn from them. Hence the title, Wisdom of the Ants. And in fact, the word wisdom is coming directly from a quote that I'm sure many of us have heard, which actually comes from the Bible. And I know this is a secular community, but I think it's quite interesting to just reflect on the extent to which ants have sort of permeated into human history, human culture, human society in quite a few ways. And so we have this quote from King Solomon, no relation, in which he advises people to look to the ant. Consider her ways and be wise. And so certainly I'm not the first to sort of recognize that there might be some ways in which ants are doing things that could be things that we should sort of pay attention to. So that's sort of the background. Just a tiny bit about ants themselves. So this is my quick primer in ant biology for those who never wanted to know. So what are ants? Ants actually are wasps. So ants are a lineage of highly derived wasps, meaning that if you look at the evolutionary history of wasps, which this tree here is showing us, what we can see is that you have a variety of different groups in which social behavior, living collectively as a society, as a colony, has actually evolved multiple times independently. Those are the red lineages there. And one of those red lineages happens to be this group that we call the ants in the family Formicidae. So ants are in fact just one lineage of social wasps. And one of the things that makes all social organisms really sort of unique is the fact that they have a queen who is specialized in reproduction and worker individuals, worker ants in the case of ants, that are doing all of the other tasks in the colony. And that is something that we'll come back to kind of throughout this talk. Now, in terms of just their sort of basic biology and development, the way a colony is established is the queen will leave her nest at some point, and she will mate with one or multiple males, and then she will establish a nest for herself and begin laying eggs. And those eggs are going to go through a developmental process in which they go from an egg to a small larva. The larva grows a little bit, looks something like a jelly bean for a while, and then starts to go through a developmental process in which, if you were to look carefully at it, you can kind of pick out the individual body parts, right? Like there's sort of folded up legs and antennae in here. This is actually an eye. And then just before it emerges as an adult worker, now it really looks like it's got all the body parts. It's even got the coloration and all of that. That process can take a few weeks or even a few months depending on the species. So we have a colony in which we have these distinct types of individuals, and we'll call them castes. So we have the queen. We have this big one here is the queen. The queen isn't always bigger than the workers. Sometimes she's the exact same size, but in some species she's substantially larger. And then we have the worker ants, and these are the ones that we typically see. I mean, most ants you've ever seen are worker ants. And then we have the males, and if you see a male ant, you might not even recognize that it's an ant, because actually male ants look a lot like wasps. I already told you that they are wasps. This is where you can actually see that evolutionary heritage is in the males. And often, actually, we have difficulty identifying ant males to species because a lot of the sort of diagnostic keys that people develop for, like, how do you identify a species are for the workers or maybe for the queen. And the males are often overlooked. So, something that is quite interesting is that the queen, of course, is female. All of the workers are female. So this is an entirely female-dominated society. And in fact, the males are only created periodically for reproductive purposes. So most of the time in the life of an ant colony, it's all females. The males are produced often seasonally because there'll be a mating season. So the queen will lay an egg that will develop as a male. The males will emerge in the nest. Don't really do a lot in the nest. They leave, they mate, and they die. You can insert your own joke here if you wish. I'm not going to touch it. But it is quite interesting. And actually, the way in which an egg develops as either a male or a female, which could either become a worker or a queen, is quite interesting. In all of the wasps and ants, and this is true for bees as well, it turns out that if an egg is fertilized, that egg will become female. All fertilized eggs are female. Only unfertilized eggs become male. So you have this really interesting sex determination system. It's not based on chromosomes. Like we're used to, XY, that's a system that we're all familiar with. Many species have that. But that's not how sex determination happens in ants, bees, and wasps. It's whether or not an egg is fertilized. Just the idea that an unfertilized egg can actually develop and mature and be alive is unusual, right? Typically that's a dead end, right? So the males only have 1/2 of the entire genome of the species. We call that haploid. So it's called haplodiploid sex determination is the mechanism. So that's just kind of interesting. So, all right, so I promised you some wisdom. So one of the sort of pearls of wisdom here for this morning is that, well, ants actually have complex societies, right? And that's one way in which we kind of look at them and see something of ourselves, perhaps. In that they have a complex division of labor, right? You have different individuals that are specialized in performing different types of tasks. And that, of course, is a hallmark of any society. Let me give you some examples of some particularly interesting and unusual ants and the ways that they construct their societies and build their nests. So this one is quite interesting. This is known as weaver ants, and these live in tropical parts of Africa, Asia, and Australia. And what they do is they build their nest inside leaves by sort of taking different individual leaves together and binding them with silk, similar to like a spider web. But what's cool about this is the worker ants can't make that silk, this sticky silk. It's actually only the larvae that can produce it. What the worker ant will do is it will kill the larva, and it'll give it like the little secret, with its intent to like induce the larvae to start producing this sticky silk. And then it'll take the larva and sort of move it back and forth like a paintbrush. And it is using that sticky silk to form this cavity inside which the entire colony will exist. So all of the eggs, all of the larvae are going to live inside of this sort of hollow ball that is created inside of the leaves. Quite an interesting way to make your... Here's a species you can find in Central America. These make their nests in acacia trees, which have these big old thorns. And these thorns are hollow. And so what the queen will do is she will chew a little hole inside the thorn, and then she will go inside and lay her eggs in the hollow thorn. And so the entire colony, at first, lives inside one thorn. But then as the colony grows, as more and more workers emerge, then what happens is they start to get too big for one thorn, so they expand to another thorn in the same tree. And eventually, the entire tree, all of the thorns on the tree, are inhabited by these ants. So it's sort of like a high-rise condo complex of ants, right? And the beauty...
Hang on. You can try that one again.
Try this one? Oh, yeah, there we go. All right, you guys can hear me okay? All right, great. And we're back. All right, so... the beauty of this, in a sense, is that from the point of view of the tree, this might at first seem like a bad deal, right? You're covered in ants. But actually, because the ants consider this tree to be their home, they will defend it. And so if another insect starts munching on the leaves of this tree, the ants are going to viciously attack that insect. And so now this tree has essentially a standing army of mercenaries that is protecting it from herbivores. And to really reinforce this tree has gone so far as to evolve mechanisms of making food for the ants. So this tree is actually producing nectar in certain organs on the base of the leaves called extrafloral nectaries. Extrafloral meaning outside of a flower, and nectary meaning it's making nectar. So they're giving carbohydrates, a food and energy source, to the ants. And they're also, on the tips of their leaves, producing these little structures that are rich in proteins and lipids. So the tree is like providing a complete diet for these ants. And that just gives you a sense, okay. Hello, all right, there we go. So that gives you a sense for how important the ants are to the tree, in the sense that the tree is going to give up some of its valuable resources to encourage the ants to, now they're gonna defend not only their home, but their food source as well. And so these trees are quite well protected. You do not want to brush up against one of these trees, I can tell you from experience. The thorns are the least of your problems at this point. So sometimes these nests can be quite large, like the numbers of individuals that would fit inside an entire acacia tree. But in some cases, you can have an entire society that fits inside one acorn. So these little acorn ants in the genus Temnothorax, the entire colony fits inside one acorn. It might have a dozen workers, one little queen. The ants themselves are quite small as well. So just the variety of scale I find quite fascinating. But then the biggest of them all, so this is maybe about the tiniest that an ant colony is going to get. The biggest of all can be something like this. And this is a photo of a younger version of me back when I was a grad student. This picture was actually taken in Venezuela by my late father-in-law, who joined me as my field assistant for an expedition before I married my wife. People thought I was nuts, but it worked out great in many ways. And so we traveled all around Venezuela looking for leafcutter ants as part of my dissertation research. This is one nest of leafcutter ants. They are absolutely massive. This colony underground could have 5 million individual ants living inside of it. And we thought that this particular nest was such a beautiful example of ant architecture, we dubbed it the Taj Mahal. And in fact, it is true that individual ant species have their own distinctive style of architecture, which is quite interesting when you think about it, because there's no blueprints, there's no construction foreman or general contractor sort of telling them where to dig, right? How do they know what structure to build? I mean, this is all instinct. So, ants are in fact accomplished architects. And that is in itself something interesting that I'm happy to chat more about if anybody has questions about lessons that we might learn from them. All right. Next, moving on. This is just in the realm of cool things ants do because I can't help myself. And I'm not going to go to the video here because I don't know that my Wi-Fi is going to work, but I'm going to explain what this video would show you, and you're welcome to check it out later if you would like. This is a discovery that happened by accident, as some of the great discoveries often do. There was a researcher named Steve Yanoviak who was working in the Amazon rainforest of Peru, up in a canopy area where you've got like these walkways between trees. And he saw one of these are called turtle ants sometimes. I think they look like Darth Vader. But he saw one of these, and for some reason that I don't still know what the reason initially was, but he flicked it. And the ant fell down, 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 and he's watching it. And then it did something that he didn't expect. Instead of falling straight down to the ground, the ant fell and then curved in midair and started going horizontally and landed on the trunk of the tree that he was standing in. And he was like, no way. That I'm, rub his eyes, I imagine, and, of course, at that point, he's going to flick another ant, right? Like, he is a scientist after all. And so he flicks another ant. The ant falls, and it curves in midair and goes back to this tree trunk again. So he repeats this a few more times, same result. And he's like, this is crazy. So then, as a scientist, he's like, I got to do some experiments. He wasn't planning on studying this. He doesn't have a lot of stuff with him, but he has whiteout. So he uses whiteout. He paints over the eyes of some worker ants, flicks them, and what do you think happens? Almost. They fall down, and they curve in midair, but now they go in random directions. So if they can see where they're going, they are able to control their descent and glide back towards the trunk of the tree that they came from. This completely changed his career. This is now what he studies, and he discovered that there are, in fact, multiple species of ants that live in the canopies of rainforests that have this incredible ability. In terms of other cool abilities that some ants have, this is one that has a mousetrap embedded on its face. So basically, what you're looking at here, this is the face of the ant. Those are its eyes. These things sticking out here are its mandibles, its jaws. And it has them at 180 degrees, as you can see. This cricket is about to become its meal. Now, what you might not be able to see is there's these thin little hairs that stick out from its face right here. These are trigger hairs. If anything touches those trigger hairs, these jaws spring shut. And this is, as of today, as far as I know, still the fastest recorded movement in the animal kingdom. So they spring shut so fast that not only does this cricket not have a chance to escape, but these ants can actually use this as a defense mechanism because they will do this against a hard surface, and I've had this done against my fingernail as an example, and that is so much force that they will literally propel themselves backwards up through the air, tumbling over and over, and they can use that as like the escape button, basically. Like if they're in an emergency situation, snap the jaws, boom, you just flew like 25 body lengths away, and hopefully you're away from the threat. So pretty remarkable ability. Here's one that uses the social behavior of ants. So this is, the green thing there is a katydid, a young juvenile katydid, and it's walking up a tree trunk. Except the tree trunk isn't really a tree trunk. It's been covered in a mat of fungus. But the little holes there that you see, these little sort of circles here, some are black and some are kind of golden brown. Well, those are holes that the golden brown color is actually the head of an ant. So these ants have built this fungus mat as a trap for catching prey. So this very much reminds me of like the old whack-a-mole game. You remember this game? Right? So like basically the ants can stick their heads up through these holes and grab on to their prey. And if a bunch of them grab onto the prey, there's nothing this thing's going to be able to do to get away. So they've constructed this as a trap for catching prey. Oh, here's a zoomed-in version of the very much whack-a-mole-esque trap that these ants have set. Yeah, you just kind of want to hit them over the head a little bit. Anyway, all right. Just more incredible ants and their abilities. Army ants are sort of notorious for their abilities to kind of march through the forest and just take everything in their path, and I've experienced this firsthand on a number of occasions. People who live in regions where army ants are common, they learn that if army ants are coming through, you just get out of their way. You don't try to stop them. If they're coming into your house, you leave your house for a couple days. The benefit to this is that when you come back, there's not gonna be any cockroaches or everything's gone. This is the best natural pest control there is. But they're pretty formidable. So individual worker ants, some of them are specialized in sort of colony defense. So I just love looking at this. This is just the head, right? Here's the little tiny eyes. And these are its mandibles. They're like these ice picks. And basically, these are just evolved to be able to embed themselves into flesh. And they're very good at doing that. So they'll embed themselves, and then they start stinging, and it takes a lot of force to pry them off. Okay, one more example of just some cool things that individual ants do, and that is that these ants of the desert Southwest are able to actually store food. And what I mean by that is this big ball here is actually the abdomen of an ant, an individual worker ant, that never leaves the nest. The other workers go out and they find like some nectar maybe, and they gobble up as much as they can. They bring it back to the nest. They literally regurgitate it into the mouths of these workers. And these workers just get bigger and bigger and bigger, and they are literally living food storage vessels for the colony. So that if ever there is a time in which there's a shortage of food, these ants will then regurgitate that food back into the mouths of all of the other individuals. So they are the living pantry of the ants. So indeed, ants store food, and this is one of the sort of aspects of what King Solomon was talking about, storing food for the winter. Okay, so I want to keep going, and I know we want to leave plenty of time for questions, so I'll try to not geek out too much about leafcutter ants, but these really are my favorites. So I'll just say a few things about them. They cut leaves, as their name suggests, and some of you have probably seen these either here in Texas, where we have a species, or down in Central and South America. And their highways in which they sort of carry all these leaf fragments back to the nest are absolutely unbelievable, because you can recognize these highways even when the ants aren't there. They're constructing roads. And there's just tens of thousands coming and going. But the ants can't eat leaves. So what are they doing with these leaves? Well, in fact, they are feeding these leaves to a fungus that they are growing in their underground nests. So if you dig up one of those giant nests, like the picture I showed you, which I have done many times, you find these underground chambers that are about the size of a volleyball, and they're filled with this spongy mass of fungus. So what the ants are doing is they are cutting those little leaf fragments up into tiny little bits, and you can see some of that as the green fragments in the top left photo here. If you look at the fungus under a microscope, what you'll see is that the tips of the fungal strands have actually become swollen and enlarged. And this is only the case in the fungi that are grown by these leafcutter ants. They actually have become domesticated. This is a crop that the ants are growing that has become a domesticated crop, because this fungus is fully dependent on the ants for its propagation. It cannot live on its own in the wild. And actually, just like our domesticated crops, it has been modified over evolutionary time to have enhanced edibility and nutrient properties. So those swollen tips at the end are actually packed with nutrients and energy. So this is a domesticated crop that these ants are growing. So in fact, ants are accomplished farmers. And we just published a paper about a month ago that showed that the origin of this behavior of growing fungi as a crop dates to precisely 66 million years ago. So ants have been doing this farming for 66 million years. We've been doing farming for about 10,000 years. So they've got a bit of a head start. Now, who can tell me what happened 66 million years ago other than ants farming food? That is exactly when the last major mass extinction event happened that killed the dinosaurs and many other species, when a meteor hit the Earth, right, and triggered a sort of nuclear winter that lasted for years. We think we can't prove that this is what triggered ants to start growing fungi as food, but we think it is probably not a coincidence, because if you can imagine what life was like in that time, all of a sudden growing a crop that is based on decay and rot. Sounds like a pretty good way to make a living. So we think that's probably not a coincidence. But the thing is that because ants have been doing this so long, there are probably other practical lessons that we can learn. And we know that ants suffer many of the same challenges in growing food as human farmers. And one of those is pest and disease, right? So there's a particular type of a pest that happens to be another fungus that can attack these ant gardens. It's called Escovopsis. And if that happens, their crop will be wiped out, completely devastated, gone. And the ants are dependent on these as their only source of food, so this is really bad news for the ants. So what do the ants do? How have they managed to be growing this crop for 66 million years? Well, ants have come up with a creative solution, and that can be seen by this ant here, which appears to be white, but the white on the ant is actually bacteria. This ant is covered in so much bacteria that it's visible to the naked eye, which normally you would think that's not a good situation. But actually, these bacteria are producing antifungal compounds. So in essence, these ants they have a pharmaceutical factory on their bodies that's producing pesticides that is helping them to keep their gardens free of pest and disease. And by keeping these bacteria alive, we think that is one of the ways that they've sort of solved the problem that we keep facing in our agriculture, which is you plant a field with all the same crop, you are inviting a pest or a pathogen or a disease to come and wipe it out. Yeah, we use pesticides too, but the pests keep evolving resistance to those pesticides. You're in this arms race, this back and forth. How do the ants get around that? By keeping living bacteria, these bacteria can evolve as well. And so they've got sort of, their card up their sleeve in the sense that the bacteria are acting on their behalf to a certain extent and can evolve to their benefit. Okay, so I want to sort of conclude by giving you a few examples of some other sort of recent research that I've been doing, that helps us to see a little bit about other practical benefits that we might be able to learn from ants. And the first is one I know we can all relate to, and that is traffic jams. So this is actually a project that came about in one of those weird ways that sometimes research happens in academia. I was having lunch on the Rice campus one day, and somebody that I know came up to me and said, "Oh, Scott, let me introduce you. There's a group visiting from Costa Rica." And I thought, "Oh, sure, love to meet them." So I start talking to this professor named Andre Herrera. He's a physicist, and starts telling me about his research. He said, "I've got a really interesting project I'm working on right now. We, as physicists, are trying to think about traffic from the point of view of individual vehicles or pedestrians acting as particles, and if we can understand all of the interactions between individual particles, we can model how traffic jams start and potentially think about ways to sort of solve traffic problems." And he had heard or read that ants never get into traffic jams. So he tells me that. He's like, "Yeah, we heard about ants, but we're physicists. We don't know anything about ants." And I was like, I might actually be able to help you with that. And so, lo and behold, we started up a collaboration that was a lot of fun, in which we spent a couple of field seasons down in the jungles of Costa Rica trying to create traffic jams on ant foraging highways with leafcutter ants. It was a lot of fun to be out in the field, in the jungle, with physicists who have not spent a lot of time out in the jungle in the middle of the night, and they had some really creative solutions to some of the problems that I never would have come up with. But basically, we are causing traffic jams by doing things like putting a barrier in the path of the ants that has only one or two openings for them to be able to squeeze through, and then videotaping them and trying to capture the individual movement of every individual ant and model that mathematically. And one of the things that we see is that, yeah, there is actually a local slowdown. I mean, if this happened on 610, right, it'd be backed up for all the way out to Katy or something, right? So, ants are having a local slowdown, but it doesn't extend further. So our question is, what are they doing differently? Now, there's some limitations to this, because ants don't care if they run into one another, right? So that's one way in which this analogy starts to break down. But I think they're actually doing something that is similar to actually what we are doing as well, and that is they use pheromones, chemicals, to tell one another where they've been. So as soon as one ant figures out the fastest way through or around this obstacle, it's laying down a chemical pheromone trail that the other ants can follow, and the other ants will pretty quickly start to use that route. This is pretty much what we do when we're using like Waze or Google Maps or some other sort of GPS-based navigational software. And in fact, there's an entire class of computer algorithms called ant colony optimization algorithms that are based on using digital ants and digital pheromones to try to figure out the fastest delivery routes. This is like what Amazon and others use for mapping out their delivery routes. So we've already sort of started tapping into the wisdom of the ants regarding traffic jams. But part of what we're thinking is, in a future where there are self-driving cars, if we can program them to behave more like ants than like people, then we might actually all be able to benefit from that. Okay, do I have time for one more example? Yeah. All right, great. So this is a local one that I think many people here will be able to relate to. Who here was in Houston for Hurricane Harvey? Yeah, me too. All right. My house flooded and we had to rebuild it. So this is a very personal story. But it turns out that I was doing, well, let me give you the background. So I was doing some research pre-Hurricane Harvey with my collaborator at Rice, Dr. Tom Miller, out in the Big Thicket region of East Texas. Has anybody been out to Big Thicket? If you haven't been, yeah. If you haven't been, it's quite beautiful. It's actually part of the National Park Service. Great hiking trails, some beautiful places for canoeing and kayaking, et cetera. But part of what's interesting is it's spread out over this sort of wide stretch of East Texas. So the units of the National Preserve are shown in green on this map, which you might be able to make out. And then the red stars show the places where we had been collecting data on the diversity of ants over time. And we had not been thinking about the impacts of flooding when we started this project. But much like the guy who started flicking ants from the rainforest canopy, sometimes something happens that makes you sort of change what your research focus is. And for us, it was the flooding that happened from Hurricane Harvey. As bad as that flooding was here in Houston, it was actually even worse slightly to our east. And so the area around Beaumont and just to the north, which is where the Big Thicket is, had some of the highest flood rates anywhere, as you can see from this map of just the rainfall totals. So one of the things that we were able to do is look at how this impacted ant communities, right? I mean, it's one of those things where as ecologists, we suspect that having these major catastrophic events like epic floods probably have a big impact on natural communities. But it's really hard to go out and study that because you can't predict when and where these things are going to happen. So when we happen to have data in this area before the flood, that gave us the opportunity to go back after and take a look at how things had changed. So one of the things that we were already looking at in this area was the distribution of native and non-native ants. So one thing we had seen pre-Harvey, you guys are still hearing me, right? The mic's on? I'm good? Okay. For some reason I thought it wasn't. Is that there are some places where an invasive species known as the crazy ant, or sometimes known as the raspberry crazy ant. Has anybody ever heard of this? No? Or tawny crazy ant? A few hands. Okay. It was called the raspberry crazy ant, incidentally, not because it tastes like raspberries, but because the guy named Tom Raspberry was the first person. He was an exterminator down in southeast of Texas, southeast of Houston, excuse me, around Sugar Land, I believe is where it was, that first documented the arrival of this non-native ant. And it quickly started spreading and displacing other ants. So what I'm showing you here is that areas that don't have this tawny crazy ant here, this is showing you the relative proportion of all the other species of ants that we find in those places. So you can see there's a mix of different species. And then you go over to a place that has this tawny crazy ant, and that's pretty much all you see. They have completely wiped out the entire community of native ants. And by the way, they displace fire ants as well. So some people are like, oh, good, and other people are like, well, wait a second, name your poison, right? Because they have other nasty things that they do, like shorting out electronic devices. That's fun. Yeah. These are the crazy ants. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So one of the things we wanted to know is, like, did this epic flooding have a disproportionate impact on native or non-native ants, right? Is this a way that, sort of could help give the native ants an advantage, or does it do the opposite? Does it actually give the invasive ants, which thrive on disturbance, especially human disturbance, an advantage? And basically what we found is, if you look at just the number of ant species in our sites, you look pre-Harvey, we collected over 2 years in both the spring and the fall. And there's a little bit of variation, but it's largely pretty stable. We did see a decline immediately after Harvey. So this was in the fall of 2017, like a month after the epic floods. And by the way, the floods here, we see high water marks in the trees in some of our field sites way over my head. So the flood line here was something like 10, 12 feet. So any ants that are living on the ground were way underwater. That much is clear. So it's not surprising that the number of ants went down right after this epic flood. But what was interesting is that the numbers came back quickly. So even by spring of the following year, they were already back to pre-Harvey levels. If we look at what percentage of those ants are invasive species versus native species, once again, we see a big decline right after Hurricane Harvey, and then it basically comes back to pre-Harvey levels. And that is true of both the invasives and the native ants. If you look at individual species of invasives like fire ants, same pattern, and this is also true for the tawny crazy ants. So basically what I would say is that part of our takeaway from this is that these ants are just incredibly resilient, right? I mean, like, what was an epic natural disaster for us as humans was a temporary setback for the ants. And within 6 months, they were back to doing what they do as ants. How? We don't really know. We know fire ants can form rafts. Some of you might have heard of this or even seen it. I've experienced it personally. It's fascinating and horrifying in equal proportions. Most ants can't do that, including the crazy ants. So we don't actually know how they do that, but it certainly gives us questions that we can start to ask about how they actually manage this. Okay, I think I should probably stop because I want to ask leave plenty of time for you guys to ask questions. So I just want to acknowledge that I have a lot of collaborators and students that have helped with all of this research that I've been talking about, as well as funding from a variety of places, including the National Science Foundation, RICE, support from the National Park Service, and of course my collaborators at the Universidad de Costa Rica. And I will leave you then with a few suggestions of other places that you can go if you would like to learn more about ants, and I would encourage you to do that. So, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that absolutely fantastic talk, Scott. I'll be handing out the microphone. Remember, we have folks up that are watching online, so please be sure to wait until I hand you the microphone.
These ants are like Descartes automatons, are they not? So the pheromones, there's no plasticity with ants in terms of learning. It's all locked in, right?
That's a great question. So actually, I cut this out because I didn't think I had time to talk about it, but I actually had a recent research project where we were looking at, could ants learn? And the specific behavior we were looking at is, we know about a species of ant that is a native ant here in the genus Aphaenogaster, and they do this amazing thing where they're actually using tools. And what I mean by that is, if you leave out as I have done, a note card on the forest floor and put some honey on there. Of course, ants love honey, so they're going to come and they're going to, eat the honey and head back to their nest. But this species comes and they start dropping things in the honey. And what they drop are pieces of soil, dry leaves, things that are absorbent and will soak up the honey like a sponge, and then they carry that back to the nest. They can bring more food back to the larvae and to their sisters by using these absorbent materials. And so we were fascinated by this, and we thought, can all the ants do that? Do they have to learn this behavior? How do they know which materials to use? Because it was not just everything they were putting in, it was certain things. And so I had a student working with me on this project, and what she found is that, in fact, there was some indication of learning. Not all the individual ants in the colony would immediately start using tools. Those that were around older ants that already knew how to use tools were more likely to use tools and would start using tools more quickly than if they weren't around other individuals that knew how. So that's some suggestion that learning does actually happen. But I think you're right. Generally, we think about them relying on instinct, but being in a society, perhaps it's not too surprising that there is going to be some learning from one another.
Part B, that you mentioned the fastest reaction time of those men. I mean, that's still actomycin. Does anybody know the mechanism of that?
Yeah, so there have been biomechanics studies on this. One of the things that's interesting is that reaction of the shutting of the jaws, it's not mediated by the central nervous system. The signal doesn't have to go to the brain and then back to the muscles. It's an automatic trigger response, right? So yes, it's still using all of the, mechanics of muscle movement and all these kinds of things that would be true of any muscle movement. But part of what makes it fast is the fact that it's not having to go to the brain and back. The other thing that makes it fast is there's a physical mechanism that basically loads that as like a spring, right? And then that is released. So there's actually some physics here. There's some mechanical advantage associated with being able to sort of set that like a mousetrap, right? Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I gotta say, wow, right? The first one is, it felt like that allergy was the master instead of the ants being the master, because the ants were bringing food back to them too. And the other question is, how would you get rid of ants from your home in a nice way?
Well, that's the number one question that I get asked along with people apologizing for killing ants, and I'm like, you don't want to know how many ants I've sacrificed in the name of science. But so I'm going to dodge the second question because I don't do extermination. I always advise people to just observe and admire and appreciate the amazing creatures that have entered your kitchen, and just maybe you might learn something from, I realize that's not always practical. But I think your first question, if I understood correctly, was about the ants that get larger and larger as they're storing food? Oh, no.
The leafcutter ants.
Oh, yeah.
It felt like they were bringing food back to that fungi.
Oh, yes. So thinking about the ants growing fungus, you're absolutely right that sometimes we tend to kind of view this from an anthropomorphic perspective where, oh, the ants are farmers, they're growing a crop, and that's how I presented it. But you could turn that around and say the fungi have really domesticated these ants and sent them out on their behalf to go retrieve things. One of the things that we often, and there's a lot of research on this, it's like, how do the ants decide which leaves to cut? You're living in like a rainforest, there's the rich diversity of leaves to choose from. It's not just any leaves that they choose. There are certain things that they have a preference for. Is that preference a preference of the ants or a preference of the fungus? And there's a lot of indications that suggest that it's actually the fungus that is doing the choosing in a way, because the ants will go out and they'll collect different things, they bring it back. Not all of that gets incorporated into the fungus garden. And so there are things like leaves can have fungus in its tissues. There's some, certain types of fungi that live in leaves. That creates a potential problem if you've got fungi then sort of in competition with one another. They can have all different sorts of chemical compounds in those leaves, some of which might be harmful to the fungus, right? So we do think that ants sort of act on behalf of the fungus, and do they just know which ones to pick, or is it trial and error? And going back to the learning question, it seems to be a little bit of that as well. So yeah, I think it's a great perspective.
Hello. Wonderful talk. I have a question. A few years ago, I was camping in Mexico in the Primavera National Forest between Guadalajara and Puerto Vallarta, and I came upon a bunch of leafcutter ants traveling in a line, and I sat down next to them, and I watched them for a long time. Did they know I was there?
Well, I can relate. I've done that as well. It's mesmerizing, isn't it?
It
It's
is, it
better
is.
than
I
TV.
watched them
Yeah,
forever. They had
yeah.
bougainvillea leaves and
Oh, yeah.
flower. They had all sorts of beautiful things.
Yeah.
But I sat there for like an hour.
Yeah.
They
yeah.
ignored me. But
Yeah,
did they have any kind of a knowledge that I was there and
Yeah,
Not
that's a good
dangerous.
question. They might have. So they do have eyes. They have some visual abilities, but the world of the ants is largely a chemical world. So they are very much reliant on what they can smell. So that probably depends on the wind direction, how close you were, all of those kinds of things. I would say there's a pretty good chance that if you were close to them, that they knew you were there, and they just don't bother, unless you're actively doing something that they perceive as a threat. They have no reason to interact with you. So I think, they, in my experience, they are able to detect my presence before I expect they will. I one time almost ran into a nest of bullet ants, which, if you're not familiar with bullet ants, the name alone probably tells you this is not an ant you want to mess with. In fact, it's thought to be the ant that has the most potent venom when they sting you. And I was in Costa Rica again, a different time. I'm walking up, and I just hear a squeaking sound. And I'm like, took a while for my brain to process. I look down, and there's all of these bullet ants. They make their nest at the base of trees. They were warning me that I was getting too close to their nest. Now, in that case, I assume they probably felt the vibrations of my footsteps. They're very attuned to vibrations. And in fact, if you pick up an individual, I've seen this with leafcutter ants, you hold it up to your ear. You wouldn't normally hear it, but if you hold it up to your ear, you can hear them squeaking. But what they're doing is actually, they're rubbing body parts together. It's called stridulation, and that's creating a vibration. And that is their warning, that is actually their cry for help to their sisters. Because if the ants get buried in their nest or something, they will send out that vibration that the other ants can feel with their legs. They'll feel those vibrations, and they will dig in the direction of the vibrations and rescue their sisters. So they can pick up on all these different sorts of cues. But if you're just sitting there, then you wouldn't be causing any vibrations, presumably. So, probably that, yeah. Very cool.
Along those lines, there's a question online. Ants greet each other on the superhighway. How complex are these greetings?
The superhighway, yeah. Not the information superhighway, right? But and it is fun to watch as ants, like on those highways that I was showing you pictures of, they will come up to one another, and typically what you'll see is they will touch antennae. And so usually what they're doing is they are exchanging information with their antennae. One of the things that they're doing is they are asking, are you my sister or not? Are you part of the nest or not? And they have, in addition to pheromones, which are chemicals that are released from the body and linger in the environment for some time, they also have a chemical makeup of their exoskeleton. So they have what are called cuticular hydrocarbons. So these are a particular type of carbon compound that makes up the cuticle, the exoskeleton. And it is variable enough that individual colonies will have their own distinctive makeup. And that allows individual ants to recognize you're a nest mate, you're a non-nest mate. A non-nest mate usually means battle. A nest mate would mean, carry on, basically. And I will just say that it's actually one of the reasons that our fire ants here are so problematic for us. As you may know, that is another invasive species. They're from South America originally, arrived here in Mobile, Alabama in the 1930s, by the way, have spread since then. Why have they been so successful? Why are they so hard for us to control? One reason is they have a mutation, not all, but many of them here in our region have a mutation in which part of one chromosome is flipped around backwards. And that chromosome is where there is a gene that is the gene that helps these ants to recognize those cuticular hydrocarbon profiles. So when that gene is not functional, those ants cannot tell if another ant is a nest mate or a non-nest mate. At that point, you have two choices. You either treat everyone as a non-nest mate and attack every ant you see, which is not a good strategy, or you treat every ant you see as a nest mate. And that is, in fact, what these fire ants have done. And so they do not have territories that they defend. They will welcome any other fire ant that they see as if it is a nest mate, and that allows them to have much higher nest densities. You can have one fire ant nest and another fire ant nest right next to one another, and they just act like they're all part of the same family, and that's part of what has led to their success here.
Awesome. Last question.
I think you partially answered my question. I was wondering how the crazy ants and the fire ants drive out the native ant species. Is it like whole colonies fighting or eating each other, or?
It's actually a really good question. It's something that we're still trying to understand. So we think typically it's a combination of both directly attacking one another and also outcompeting one another. But I would say most often it seems to be the competition is the more successful strategy. In other words, and we see this, I mentioned putting honey out on a note card in the forest. One of the classic ways that we try to understand this competition is by putting a food resource like that out and then following it over time. There's two strategies that certain ant species can use to be successful at competition. Either you're the first to the food, you're really good at going out, sending out scouts and finding food as soon as it appears, and that allows you to get that food more quickly than other ants. Or you don't worry about being first, but once you do show up, you dominate that resource. You either attack or just through numbers, you're better at maybe recruiting more nest mates to that. So there's either we call this the discovery dominance trade-off. You're either good at discovering food or dominating that food once you get there. But these invasive ants tend to be very good at one or the other of those strategies.
Thank you so very much. This was fascinating. Thanks,
My pleasure.
Todd.
Yeah, thank you all.
Pete, take it away for a couple more songs.
Cool. Thank you. This song seems apropos. He wakes up in the morning, his teeth bite to eat on his rollie, never changes a thing. The week ends, the week begins. She thinks we look at each other, wondering one from the other is thinking, but we never say a thing. And these crimes between us grow deeper. Take these chances, place them in a box until a quieter time lights down you up and I, yeah. Goes to visit his mommy, she feeds him well as concerns he forgets them and remembers being small, playing under the table and dreaming. Take these chances, place them in a box until a quieter time lights down you up and I. Driving in on this highway, all these cars end up on the sidewalk, people in every direction. No words exchanged, no time to exchange when all the little hands are marching. Red and black ants in my way, we all do it the same. Every man cuts in the forward, sweet tooth torching the weight loss. Program crops in the forward, loosen, cut, almost said, almost said, cut, take these chances, place them in a box until a quieter time. Yeah. One more? We have time? Okay. Tasted love so sweet. All of it was lost on me. Bought and sold like property. Sugar on my tongue. Kept falling over. Kept looking backwards. I got lost believing that the simple should be hard. All we are, we are. All we are, we are. Every day's the start. Something beautiful, beautiful. Wasted love for you. Traded out for something new. It's hard to change the way you lose if you think you've never won. All we are, we are. All we are, we are. Every day's the start. Something beautiful. Beautiful. In the end, the words won't matter. In the end, nothing stays the same. In the end, our dreams just scatter and fall like rain. Start something beautiful, something real. All we are, we are. All we are, we are. Every day's the start. Something beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. Have a lovely morning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pete. Always love hearing you play, so greatly appreciate you stepping up on last minute notice and all of that. So a couple quick announcements. Of course, it is wonderful to see you all here, but Houston Oasis does rely on donations to make sure we get together every Sunday, rent this room, pay for some of our musicians, et cetera, et cetera. And so if you are able to, please consider donating to Houston Oasis. We are a 501c3, and And there's a number of different ways to give on the back of the bulletin. And if none of those works for you, Tim is sitting in the back and more than happy to help you out with that as well. So greatly appreciate your generosity. We have a number of events coming up over the next few weeks. Blues Night is on Thursday, November 21st, yes, at the Big Easy. Will is generally there. The Mighty Orc will be playing. Oasis Book Club is on December 4th at Cafe Express. Ginger, do you know where people are, what book is being read and all of that? Bel Canto. Okay, so if you're interested in finding out more, it's also in the in the bulletin, and feel free to reach out to Ginger. I don't see Ted here today. So the Secular Houston Oasis Solstice Party is going to be happening on December 14th, right? That's the date that okay. At Gristworks from 7 to 10 p.m. That is always a lot of fun. It is actually a secular a solstice party from a number of different secular organizations across the greater Houston region. Always a lot of fun. Lunch today is going to be at Katz's. Next week is the 4th Sunday of the month, so we'll be doing Bring Your Own Lunch here. In addition to that, next Sunday, we also have the Fragile Blue Dot presentation by Ross West. He's going to be joining us. He's a very dear friend of Terry Ismerd. She has a few of his books, so if you're interested in that. And music is going to be by Hank Woji, so he's obviously a regular here. Always love hearing him play. With that, I think that kind of wraps it up. I do want to send a very sincere thank you to all of our volunteers here at Houston Oasis. We are a volunteer-run organization. Without people being at the storage facility at 9 o'clock in the morning and picking up everything, setting out the chairs, setting up the recording equipment and the audio equipment, and organizing the music and the speakers, etc., none of this would be possible. So please, when you see somebody hustling and making things happen, do thank them, and also if you're interested in helping out, whether that is on the speakers committee or helping with the audio, helping with coffee, please don't hesitate to reach out to one of the board members. We'll be more than happy to give you a bit of an overview and make sure to get you plugged in. So thank you all very much for coming today, and we'll see you next Sunday.
Times I think my mom's wrong.